to come back to your point about regulation. That's a truly horrific picture that you painted, the 300 cities, counties. I mean, I frankly can't imagine how you get business done in that kind of environment. So I would think you'd be wanting change desperately, and as much as Kathy, and as much as David. And I just wonder, what have you thought about that would work better than what you're contending with now? I can't imagine how it could be worse. So,
well,
I wonder,
okay, we're at the bottom now, and there's nowhere to go but up. I don't have any particular solutions, and you see the process that they're trying to go through to think this through, and there is no easy solution because every city wants to do what's best for their city, and so to lose control to a regional government is really a problem. But predictability and consistency affect cost and affect affordability, and so I think the one thing we could do is stop passing new laws that are complicated and unfunded, and recognize the cost of the new law. My contention in this realm of stormwater management is that King County, and you guys may disagree with me, but I think we lead the nation in terms of the water quality manual, and the issue is, are we doing it? Are we doing it correctly? Are we monitoring it? Are we carrying through the mitigation all the way to completion? And I would suggest that we're not. But rather than create a new series of regulations, let's make sure that the ones we have now are being worked to the full force and effect. And so that is education, but it can't be completely voluntary. It's enforcement, and it's accountability of the people who live here today and are coming in the future. But there's a lot of potential in the regulation that we have today to continue to add water to that glass that's half full.
Something we heard over and over again in the reporting is there's no funding for positions to go out and look and see if your competitor is doing wetland mitigation right, following up, checking, and then it's all about more permits faster, and they don't have the time, they don't have the people.
I think that's irresponsible legislation, that you don't understand the full costs of what it takes, not only to process the permit, but to then enforce the permit. L&I can't go through they have a new heat stress rule now that we're supposed to try and manage against heat stress. How are we possibly going to involve ourselves with the complexity? How are they possibly going to enforce that when they can't even enforce the original safety regulations that really do make sense, fall protection and things like that? Today, with the housing market contracting, Ron Sims and Aaron Reardon and John Ladenburg are laying off people in their permitting department right and left. I still need permits. We still need to do SEPA reviews. We still need to be responsible because we're not going to just stop growing, but as the economy contracts, so does the staff. And now we get backlogs, poor reviews, no follow-up, and it's not a good system. I don't have the answers.
I think there's been a lot of pressure, a lot more political pressure to get the permits out than to enforce. And, I think that's the result. So you get a lot of pressure to keep those permits coming out the door at all costs, but then the follow-up just isn't there. And that's true at every level of government. I think there's also fear among people who have that enforcement responsibility that there'll be political repercussions. I know there's a belief in the Department of Ecology that their budgets have been cut when they've been more aggressive about enforcement. And I think your stories really get at this enforcement issue. And I'm hoping that the Puget Sound Partnership will really come up with some solutions there, because
can you believe that I'm
key.
advocating for enforcement?
Well, I appreciate that.
And so does my association,
that.
King and Snohomish
Yeah.
and Pierce, because we have the law on the books.
You
Let's
need
do it right.
you need the level playing field, and the public, the public cynicism, I think, isn't going to go away till they see enforcement and equity. And I think there's some basic fairness issues that Peter has raised here, partly about inconsistent enforcement, partly about inconsistent rules and regulations as you go around the region, and you create an area where it's easier to do stuff that hurts the environment. Then all the bad stuff will flock to that area, and that's not sensible in terms of the health of Puget Sound.
Here's something that we're actually working on right now. Through the new NPDES permitting laws, we actually certify every one of our superintendents, our on-site people, go through a certification class that when we have a rain event, they take a sample of our detention facilities and measure the turbidity and monitor the flows. And sometimes when we have an event or we exceed turbidity, the responsibility is then to notify DOE, and there's a chain of communications, and what are you doing to get that back to manageable levels. But our people are actually self-certifying and monitoring and taking the responsibility to do that. City of Vancouver does self-permitting. That's an example. I'm not necessarily thinking we have any chance of getting that here, but it's an example where if you understand the accountabilities associated with this process, we can put private sector people on the ground to help with that enforcement process.
You know, Peter, I want to ask you a follow-up question. You were talking about King County stormwater standards. I mean, one of the things that a number of scientists who are experts in stormwater have said is that even with the most up-to-date conventional standards, that the sort of pipe and pond system for dealing with stormwater is just sort of fundamentally flawed in terms of environmental impacts, because you're changing the hydrology of the area where you're doing the development. Some of those folks promote low-impact development as one way of trying to remedy that.
Yeah.
And I've spoken with you about this before, and other people in the industry, and one thing that they say is, they're dealing with the geology of a particular site, and in some places it works, and in some places it doesn't. Some of the LID proponents say that it works in a lot of places where the industry hasn't been willing to go, or hasn't been willing to do that yet.
Okay, I get your question.
How do you develop them?
Exactly, and it's a complicated issue. You had a picture of beautiful flat-topped lots in the newspaper, and the comment was that this is not LID. This does not allow for infiltration. Well, that's clay, so I don't quite know how I'm going to infiltrate, so we had to go to detention standards. I have a project in Northwest Landing down by the Nisqually Delta. That is all gravel. That infiltrates beautifully, and we do it there. And so every place is different. The topography is a factor, the flat versus hillside. The issue with infiltration is it's not so simple, and it doesn't stop with the installation. So in fact, there's higher technologies, injector wells, where you actually go down and you penetrate and you get to a place where it does infiltrate better. Now you're talking about a fairly complicated technology. One, expensive, but okay. Two, now who takes care of it once we've built all the homes and the homeowners association is now in charge of a fairly complicated engineering device? We had not injector wells, but many years ago we had a community that was one of the first infiltration ponds, and it was surface infiltration. And it got clogged with silt and leaves and the like, and it failed. And so we were still on our performance bond. We came out and we fixed it, and it was very expensive. And we finally got it to a place where it was working properly. I don't know what the condition of it is today. The Homeowners Association, King County, are responsible for that. That requires time and money and technological understanding to manage something like that. So we have to be careful that what we put in place is, expense isn't the only issue. It's the manageability, the technology, the human factor of continuing that monitoring. And so we can't get too cute, or we end up right back where we were 10 years ago.